Welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. This is presented by SCORE on North Cook and Lake counties here. And our presenter is Chris Banakis, who's a mentor with the North Cook and Lake counties chapter of SCORE. My name's John Fisher, and I'm one of over 70 mentors that we have with our SCORE chapter. So I'm going to be the moderator for this evening. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. So if you need to find our YouTube channel, just go to our website at score.org/North Chicago, and there'll be a little box in there that says YouTube channel. So submit your questions this evening using the chat function. At any time. We'll welcome all your questions, and they'll be answered at the end by Chris here. So the formal presentation is about 45 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. So before we begin, we want to have a word from our sponsor. Here is Claire McCulley, who is the business librarian at Glenview Public Library. Claire, take it away.
So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is the How to Transition a Good Idea into a Great Business program. Thank you to Chris and John and SCORE for this presentation. This program is presented in partnership by Evanston, Glenview, Skokie, and Wilmette Public Libraries. And now John will share a little bit more information about SCORE.
Okay, Chris, you want to go to the next slide here? So SCORE is affiliated with the Small Business Administration, U.S. Small Business Administration. We are a separate independent nonprofit, and but we are affiliated with Small Business Administration. So off to the next slide here, Chris. So SCORE has a huge impact on small businesses in the United States. We have over 10,000 experienced mentors all across the country. And our chapter alone here was responsible for enabling 197 new businesses to start in 2022. And we created 866 jobs. So next slide, please. The SCORE provides free confidential mentoring for small businesses. Those are businesses of $10 million or less revenue. And our website has an amazing library of resources for people who want to start a new business or grow an existing business. So if you want to request a mentor from us, please visit our website, score.org/North Chicago. And you will see all of the available resources that we have and can request a mentor based on either location or on expertise. So now the next slide here is all the legalese, basically saying that Chris's presentation is his own and doesn't express the views of the Small Business Administration. So we're all used to those things. Now, before we start, what I'd like to do is get a little bit of an idea here about our audience. So we've got 3 questions here. The first one is, what stage of business are you in currently? So if you will answer that question. And then the second question that we have here is, how many employees do you have? So it goes from just me to over 100. And then the last one is, what is your experience with writing a business plan? So I have not done one. I've done one, but it needs to be revised. And I'm pretty comfortable with my current business plan. So this gives us an idea here of who the audience is. And so I'll end the poll in just a few minutes here, or a minute. so that we can see, everyone can see the results here, but we have a good mix of people. Looks like the majority of people are thinking about starting a business. We have a good amount of people who have not done a business plan. So good, that's a good group for our presentation this evening. So you should be able to see the results now. Okay. And so what, whoops, hold on here, sorry. So Chris Banakis is a mentor with the North Cook and Lake Counties chapter of SCORE, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself as part of his presentation here. So Chris, why don't you take it away, and we'll be back for questions at the end of the session.
Good. John, I think we have to take that off because for some reason, I'm not. Just a second. Let me see if I can. Okay. This is being difficult. John, for some reason it's not. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Good evening.
Okay, it takes a while.
Wow, take a little while, but we're there. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is absolutely wonderful to be with you this evening. I'm delighted to be able to spend some time with you. And I'm excited to see that we actually have quite a few folks that are thinking about starting a business, because this is a terrific tool that we're going to be talking about today. How do you transition your idea into a great business? Let me give you just a little bit of my background. I've been, as John said, I'm one of the mentors at SCORE. I've been with SCORE about 7 years. I not only mentor, I also do a lot of webinars and workshops, and I also do some work on the consulting side for SCORE. I've done that for a number of years. I spent most of my career at a large telecommunications company that today is known as Motorola Solutions. And when I was with Motorola, I did a lot of work in strategy, sales and marketing. I was on the operations side for a while, and new business development. I operated both domestically, and I also operated in North Asia. So I lived and worked in mainland China for a number of years. I volunteer with a group called Incubator EDU. And for those who may not be familiar with that, that is a curriculum that brings entrepreneurship to high schools. It was originally started at Barrington High School in 2013. And today, over 128,000 students have gone through the program, and it's being worked in over 405 high schools and schools nationwide. So it really has grown, and it's a wonderful program. I've also done mentoring at the university at the master's program in entrepreneurship, and I've got a little consulting firm. I've got a group of clients that I've been working with a number of years. You know, Michael Gerber is a best-selling author of a business book called The E-Myth. If you haven't read it, it's an interesting one, especially for folks who are interested in getting into business. And one of the things he says in his opening is people who are exceptionally good at business aren't so because of what they know, but because of their insatiable need to know more. And I think the mere fact that you are with us this evening and investing in your business and trying to learn more says a lot about your commitment. So I think that's a very important element. Entrepreneurs, you are wonderful people. You are never short of ideas. Lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, lots of drive. Unfortunately, sometimes the approach is fire, ready, aim. That becomes the mantra at times. And all that energy and enthusiasm sometimes can lead to some bad outcomes. You know, we're so excited about our ideas that sometimes we just charge ahead with it. We had a client that came to us not long ago who had invented a new product, received a patent on it, was extremely excited. So looked for manufacturing in Asia, found a manufacturing facility. And one of the things that you do find out is that most of the times when you do that, you have to have a minimum build. And so sure enough, that was the case here. And when we became involved with the client, it was only after this poor person had thousands of products that were built and no one wanted to buy them. And that's always a big shock when you're going through the process. But, you know, it really shouldn't be, because the reality is, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 30% of new businesses fail in the first couple of years. And after 5 years, 50% of the businesses fail. That's a startling statistic. And, you know, the number one reason that businesses fail, small businesses fail, is that there's no market need. That's a startling statistic. Really, there was no need for the product. And yet, somebody was very excited about it and wanted to bring that product to market. Well, at SCORE, what we try to do is improve your odds. What we hope to do is make sure that you're on the success side of that pie chart and not the failure side. And today we're going to talk about a tool that really can help you with that process. So every person out there, if you've been thinking about a business, you've got some ideas. You've got some things running around in your head that says, you know what? I think I've got a pretty good idea here. What we realize is what you really have is a bunch of hypotheses, really a bunch of guesses in terms of what the solution is, what the problem is you're going to solve, who your target audience is, how you're going to bring it to market. It's just guesses at this point. You haven't really had a chance in most instances to test those. And so, you know, you've got to be able to identify what those elements are and organize that thinking. And then once you've done that, you've got to be able to take all those hypotheses and actually test them in the marketplace. This is the way we would do it in science as well. We'd have to make sure that we're right? So we take it from a guess to say, hey, it's actually a fact. We've tested it out in the marketplace. And we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to do that, folks, before we burn through a bunch of cash. Because unfortunately, that's what happens all too often. We will have many people along the way who will come to us, clients who will come to us, and they've committed to a brick and mortar facility. They've put a long-term lease down. They've signed a lease. And now they're trying to figure out how to find customers. Well, there's a number of different ways that you can ultimately get to that point. And I know in many instances, we're excited. We want to get started. We've had folks come to us and say, hey, I want to launch in Europe. I want to launch in South America. I want to get things going in Asia. And that's great. Eric Ries, who's an entrepreneur and author, said, think big, start small, and then scale fast. Once you get that model in place, then you can start scaling pretty quickly. In this case, we're looking at maybe a food service operation that maybe it started a farmer's market. Maybe you'd actually set up a little system, a table at a farmer's market, and then you'd start to gather some input. You'd talk to customers. You'd find out what products are selling well, what they're willing to pay for those products, what they like the best, how interested are they, what kind of word of mouth are you getting, what kind of take are you getting on it? And then maybe you'd move to a food truck. You'd say, hey, it looks like it's going pretty well, and I'm ready to take another step. And you'd move to a food truck, And maybe when that was starting to go well and really build and become successful, maybe that's when you'd start looking at your brick and mortar operation. So you need to think in terms of what's the process that you're going to go through to gain insight, to gain customer feedback, and from that to decide what your next steps will be and how you will build it in a process. I learned about this when I was 7 years old. My grandfather had a small diner in Oak Park, Illinois, and I would come home from school and sit on a stool at the end of the counter, and he made candy in the basement. And I would watch him walk up the stairs of the basement with a tray, and he would go from table to table with samples of a new candy that he was making. And he would go all the way through the diner, and then he'd come back to the first table and he'd ask him a bunch of questions. How'd you like it? Would you buy it? What would you pay for it? And so he was gathering data at that time, and he wouldn't go forward with a new product unless he was getting a lot of positive feedback that the customers liked it and they buy it. And so that's the process of gaining insight from our customers. And that really is a component piece of what we're going to talk about this evening, which is the business model canvas. It was created by Alexander Oswalder, and he did that in 2008. And it has become a very, very highly used document in the marketplace. It allows you to go through and really understand the important elements of your organization, how you're going to create, deliver, and capture value. But it answers 3 important questions. And this kind of gets to what we talked about before in terms of whether there's a market need. Is it desirable? Do customers really want what product or service you're looking to build or do? Is it feasible? Can you actually do it? So maybe they want it. Now we've got to say, can you actually build it? Can you actually make that happen? And then finally, maybe it's something that's desirable and it's feasible that you can do it. Can we make money? Can we actually be successful with this product or service that we're looking to bring to market? So it's a process that is being used on a wide basis in many universities. I mentioned at the high school level, that's a critical part of the curriculum that they're using. Many consultants are using that today. At SCORE, we're using it fairly extensively because it provides us with a wonderful view of the entire business on one page. It provides you with the ability to have a good deal of collaboration. And one of the things I always recommend that new startups do, and for you that are thinking about it to consider this, is to actually put together a board of advisors, a group of people who you have trust in, who might have skills that complement your skills, and who are interested in seeing you be successful. And this group of advisors, it doesn't have to be a large group, would be a board of advisors that you can turn to and collaborate with on tools like this. It helps you identify if there might be some challenges in the business. It helps you with decision making. And it should be something that allows you to continuously improve. It's not something you're only going to do once. It's something that you're going to have multiple versions of as you go through. There are actually 9 boxes that make up the business model canvas. And these are the boxes, and the description is on the left side. And these boxes make up really whether it's a large corporation, a large operation, or a single person business will have really most of the same elements associated with them. Now, I'll mention, as you look at it, if you were to research the business model canvas, you might find that there's some different iterations of this. And that's really because people have customized this and put in categories that they have felt would be key to them. And that's fine. It should be a tool that you're going to use actively. But what we're sharing today is what you would find as a template that you could pull up and use for your business. So let's take a look at the component pieces of the business model canvas. And the first one we're going to talk about is really on the right side. This is the desirability side. And that says, is that something that your market really wants? Is it something that your market really wants and they really need? So the first element of this would be the value proposition group. And that really describes the products and services that you've put together that create value for a specific customer segment. And so really what you want to think about in this area is, what problem are you solving, or what need are you addressing? And this should be kind of a big area, and it should be something that you can quantify. You should be able to find some data that demonstrates that this is a big need, this is a big problem in the marketplace or in the particular industry that you're addressing. And once you identify that in this category, then you're going to say, and this is how I plan to fix this. This is how I plan to address this particular need or problem in the marketplace. And this is where you can identify what is unique about the approach that you're going to take. It's also an area that you can highlight some of the competition. Who are the competitors who are playing in this space, and what makes you different than the competitors that are out there in the marketplace? The next is your customer segments. Who are you creating value for? What does that customer segment look like? What's the demographic? It's their age, gender, income, education level, geographic location, the psychographics, what are their attitudes, values, lifestyle? What's their purchasing behavior? That's something you may want to know about. And then, of course, you want to know how big that market is. What's the total available market or the shared market? What targets would you be going after? But the customer segments are different. What you might find as you get into this is that changes as you do some more research and you do some more investigation. But it's important to be as specific as possible. We frequently work with clients and they'll put really big, broad, well, everybody is my segment. Well, again, think big, start small, and then scale. Start small. Who would it be geographically? Who would that group look like? I mentioned that I've worked with somebody at the graduate level, and I remember being in a particular class and the professor was walking around with a felt tip pen and he would toss it at different students and he'd say, go up to the whiteboard and tell us everything you can about your customer, your target customer, your ideal customer. And this is the kind of information that you want to have an understanding for, so you know how to reach them, you know how to work with them. And it was an interesting exercise. Frequently, we will ask when we work with clients at SCORE, tell us about your ideal customer. If they walk through the door, tell me everything you can about them. And folks will struggle, but it's important to know who those people are because they are the ones who are really going to be growing your business. Frequently, you will find from an investment standpoint, if you watch Shark Tank and you go through, people want to understand the product market fit. They want to understand the value proposition and the customer segment. What are the problems, the pain that these people are experiencing, and how are you going to fix it with your products or services? Or what gains are you going to create? And you will see, when I've seen people pitching to investment groups, you'll see the investors say, hey, I got to stop you for a second. I don't understand the fit. I don't get it. I see what your market is, but I don't understand what problem you're solving for them. Once you get these two areas, well, you really get those solid, which is your value prop and your customer segment. The rest of the boxes will come together fairly quickly. So you really want to make sure that you get this figured out. Your channels. How are you going to reach that target customer group? how are you going to get to them? It can be direct sales, retail, e-commerce, social media. There's a variety of ways that people are reaching customers today. Are you going to do it yourself? Maybe you're going to get a partner. We're going to talk about partners in a little bit, but that's an important area because when you're starting out, you need to build customers. That's how you're going to get revenue in your organization. You may look for a channel partner. It may be a distributor or a dealer who has already a large group of customers that maybe he's got a line in his portfolio that's complementary to what you're going to be offering. And so they'd be a great partner for you to get. And he'd maybe like to add your product to his portfolio. So that might be something you want to think about. You want to think about whether it's going to be a supplier, distributor, whether you're going to go through retail, whether you're going to do online, and what are the stages and who's going to manage that? So how are you going to identify new customers? What are you going to do with post-sale, pre-sale? Who's going to handle all that communication? And how are you going to measure the channel? What kind of metrics are you going to use to help you measure whether you're being successful with that channel? Customer relationships. Wow, this is huge. This is huge, folks, because with any organization, people use other words, but it really falls into three categories. How do we get customers? How do we keep customers? And how do we grow customers? I mean, that's it. That's the whole deal. And it's an important element to it, right? It's how we talked before about our customer segments. How do they buy? So how are you going to reach that customer group? How are you going to build those relationships? How are you going to find them? There's a variety of tools and ways that people use that. Sometimes they write articles. Sometimes they provide some research and information. And in order to get copies of it, you're going to share your email. I'm sure you've been asked for your email in a variety of places because that's an important tool that companies and businesses use to communicate with customers, right? And so you've got to treat that carefully, but that's an important way that people find that they can reach out to customers. So what do you want to do in this category? Well, you want to get new sales, that's for sure. You want to find ways to do that. Maybe it's going to make special offers or promotions. You want to keep those customers, and that's why organizations come up with loyalty programs, right? And how they're going to connect and retain those customers. You've spent a lot of money getting them. Now you want to be able to keep them. And then you want to grow that customer group. Well, how do they do that? Companies like Amazon are probably one of the best in that. I'm sure any of you who are Amazon customers know that they will reach out and say, hey, you bought this recently. I thought you might also be interested in this related product. Or you're probably about time for your printer ink to be replaced. Well, how do they know that? Because they personalize the relationship with you. And they've done that with analytics and data. And they've done that very, very successfully. And it's a wonderful way for you to grow your business. Revenue streams. How are you going to make money? That's that. So your investors might say it's all good, it's all wonderful, but how are you going to make money here as you go through? So your pricing models. How are you going to price? It's going to be one-time sales. It's going to be subscription-based. A lot of organizations are using subscription-based because it's reoccurring revenue. It's going to be usage-based. It's going to be a product sale, service fee, licensing, advertising, whole variety of ways that you might put your revenue stream together. One of the best ways to get ideas in terms of what you're going to do from a pricing standpoint is to look at your competitors. How are they pricing? It doesn't have to be a direct competitor. It might be a company that actually is doing a related product or similar, but targeting the same customer segment that you're targeting. So that's one way, a variety of ways that you can gather a lot of intelligence to help you kind of put together what is the market willing to spend today. And so again, you're going to kind of put your hypothesis, your guess together of what you think your revenue streams will be on day one as you begin to fill out this form. Oh, jump too much, gang. There we go. So we've gone to the right side, which says, is it desirable? And now we've got to say, okay, it might be desirable, and maybe there's a real need, but is it feasible? Is it something that I can actually do by myself? Or maybe I'm going to need some help in order to do it. So what kind of help might you need? Well, you might need some resources in order to do it, maybe some physical resources. We talked about a facility. Do you need a facility? Do you need equipment? Do you need inventory in order to get started? Human resources. Do you need people with certain expertise? Do you need folks that are certified in an area? Do you need a certain educational background in order to make your business work? How do you duplicate yourself, right? Maybe you've got a certain level of expertise and you need somebody to come in that can help you grow your business that's bringing, or maybe it's complementary, intellectual property. So that is patents, trademarks, copyrights. It's all the things that typically when you're pitching to investors, they want to know how you're protecting this super idea that you've got, right? Do you have it patented? Do you have it trademarked? Do you have it copyrighted? Something that says you've got intellectual property from a resource standpoint. How about financial resources? Maybe you need funding. Now, the reality is, in new businesses, most of the funding is going to come from you, yourself, or family and friends. And so, that's why most folks have to be very, very careful. We're going to talk about costs later, but be very careful on the front end because you want to be able to control what's going out. But resources for your business take a fair amount of money. Data and analytics are also a big part of businesses today. You look at things for any new products development. I mean, you've got to have the resources and have the data in order to connect with customers and measure and have analytics in your system. Sometimes from a regulatory standpoint, regulatory compliance, you might need some resources that you've got to have in place with that. How about the key activities? How do we make this business model work? Well, you might have something around design. You might have manufacturing. You might have quality control. How about sales and marketing? That's an important activity in the early market. You're probably doing that yourself, but as time goes on, it might mean that you have to hire a sales team, or again, maybe you're looking for some kind of strategic partnership in that area, but someone's got to manage that relationship as you go through. So that's an activity that has to take place. Research and development, maybe operations. How about technology and your infrastructure? Things like security. Oh my gosh, that's really come on the scene lately. How do you make sure the information you have is secure and your IT is protected as you go through? Your financial management, budgeting, accounting, financial reporting. It's interesting. Frequently people, entrepreneurs who get started, get into it because it's an area that they love and they're really good at. But there's lots of other activities that need to take place that may not be things that you have a lot of experience with. So you've got to decide, how am I going to manage that activity that comes apart? How about risk management? Do you have to have certain kinds of insurance? You probably do. How do you protect? What are the financial, legal risks that are underway as you go through? Key partnerships. Wow, this is important. We've touched on it already, but what kind of partnerships might you need to make this model work, to make your idea work, to bring your unique value to the marketplace? Well, there's lots of different types of partnerships. There's strategic alliances, there's joint ventures, there's supplier partnerships, there's distribution partnerships. And by the way, sometimes there are fundings that can come with key partnerships. Sometimes they'll carry inventory for you if they want, to start in a certain part of the country, or they want to find someone to carry their line. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about in this, man. What's the objective? Why are you getting a partner? Why do you feel you need a partner? Frequently, when we talk to our clients, that's one of the questions we'll ask. I understand you want to bring a partner in, but what are they going to do? What are you going to do? What are they going to do? What we'll always say is, what are the gives and the gets, right? When you put a partnership together, and what's their contribution? How are you going to select the partner? What criteria are you going to use? How are you going to measure their performance? Whether it's an effective partnership. How will you know that at the end of 6 months as you go through it? Now, the next one's important, contractual arrangements, right? A lot of times when you're a small business and you're starting out, you're an individual, we have folks come to us and their partners are family members, or there may be somebody that they went to school with, or a great friend. They, she was maid of honor at my wedding, or he was best man. We've been friends for 10 years or 15 years. And what happens under those situations is frequently folks say, you know what, we don't really need to have all that stuff in writing. I mean, we know each other, we trust each other, we love each other, we're family. But I will tell you, these things can come apart. This is business, it's different. You got to figure out what are the contractual arrangements. You got to work with legal to put something together to make sure that you're both protected. And as I have said when I've worked with people that I'm close with, I love you too much not to do this. We have to do this and make sure that we protect our friendship and our relationship. And then exit strategies. How do you, if it's not working, how are you going to move away if it's not working and end that relationship? The final box, cost structure. It's a critically important one. Is this fixed costs around rents, utility, salaries, variable, is it raw materials, production costs, shipping costs? You're going to have some economy of scale here. Are you going to outsource? What's your cost going to be for that? What's your cost for, we talked about technology. You got computers, you've got phones, you've got software, you've got costs associated with that. Maybe you've got regulatory compliance. Maybe there's some licensing you have to do. Maybe there's some permits you have to get in place. And maybe there's some things you have to do from a risk management standpoint that are going to add cost to your organization. You have to understand what your costs are. I remember we had a client come to us not long ago and they said, we don't have any costs. I said, how do you know? You have to have costs. No, I'm doing it myself. I'm making it myself. I'm delivering it myself. I'm going through it. I said, it doesn't mean you don't have costs. Just because you're doing it and you're an individual contributor, you've got to be able to capture what that cost is so you understand whether it's a profitable business, because that's the next element. We've said, is it desirable? Maybe, maybe not. Is it feasible that you can do it? But now at the bottom, it says, is it viable? Can we make money? It might be a great idea. You might even be able to figure out how to bring it to market, as our friend who got it built in Asia. But can you make money? You got to be able to sell it. And that says, you got to figure out your costs. You got to subtract it from your revenue. And you got to say, am I going to be able to make money with this idea? So you might even look at this like a game board, right? Where do you start? Well, you start with maybe what your idea is, what your unique value is. And then you say, okay, who's the value going to be for? Who do I plan to help? And how am I going to reach them? How am I going to contact them? And how am I going to interact with them? What's my relationship going to be? And how am I going to make money? How much money will I make? And what do I need to get started? What kind of resources? And how will I do it? And what kind of partners might I need? And how much is it going to cost? All right, what's my cost going to be? And all of that is set up on a document like that. And as we said early on, you're going to have a whole series of hypotheses. And you are going to lay these out in each of the categories. It can be just on bullets at this point. This is your first version. It's draft one. If you come to SCORE, we would probably say, if you were new, we'd say, let's go through this exercise. This will be great. Let's pull this together. If you had a partner, you might do one and have them do one. And then you might get together and compare them and see what you came up with, kind of share some ideas. Or we talked about having an advisory board of advisors. They might help you pull this together and put it. And then once you've got your hypothesis put in place, here's the fun part. Now you've got to get out, you've got to test it. You've got to talk to prospective customers. You've got to talk to prospective partners. You've got to get a sense for whether you're on the right track, whether you're doing the right things here. Because really, in any of this process, and when we work with entrepreneurs and any group, whether it's an incubator group or an accelerator group, they're going to do the same kind of things. You're going to go through a process where you're going to come up with the idea, you're going to bring it out, and you're going to talk to prospective clients or prospective partners, and you're going to learn from them. And from the feedback that you get, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to either pivot and move in a different direction, or you're going to persevere. You're going to stick with it. You say, you know what, my original idea seems to be spot on from all the feedback I'm getting. Now, my grandfather, as he went through the restaurant, he said, I think I'm going to bring this candy to market because I'm getting positive reviews from all of these customer groups. He was going to persevere with it. And you want to be able to do this before you sign a long-term lease, before you charge ahead and sign a contract to have 5,000 pieces built, before you get yourself committed, and before you burn through a lot of revenue and a lot of cash. And, you know, we talked about it before, that in the early market, it's a lot about your personal money or family and friends who have shared their money with you and trust you. So you've got to be very careful. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups burn through a ton of money in the early market because they went and committed to expensive offices and bought vehicles and did a bunch of stuff and burned through cash before they ever had customers and ever had revenue coming in. So the business model canvas, it's a great tool. It's wonderful for entrepreneurs, those thinking about being entrepreneurs. It's how to look and develop a business strategy for your operation. Gives you a great overview, and it really helps facilitate collaboration and discussion. And it answers 3 questions. Is this product or service desirable? Is it feasible that I can do it? And is it viable? Can I make money on it? It'll help you make more informed decisions, and it really will create a sustained business. And that's something that closes after 2 years or 5. Helps you reduce your risk. So if you want to look at some examples, there are plenty available. You look at business model canvas and look at Google, look at images, and you will find, and actually look for industries and businesses. I bet you'll be able to find something very similar to the idea you have, just to give you some idea of how they filled it out. And if you want to actually get a blank business model canvas to work with, on the bottom left-hand side, strategizer.com, go to that site. That has free downloaded templates of the business model canvas. The book, Business Model Generation, up on the right-hand side, is the one that was built, or excuse me, it was written by Osterweiler, and it gives you detail of everything we talked about today. And so that can give you more information. And then I've included a couple of other books that I found helpful. But I think if you were to get Strategizer and Business Model Generation, oh, and one more, steveblank.com. Steve Blank is an entrepreneur. He's written a lot of books about this subject, and he's really got a lot of free information. He's even got some courses that he's offered, so it might be something very helpful for you going through. The next upcoming SCORE webinar is Games, Prospects, and People Play. It's scheduled to be on June 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And so you can go to our website, score.org/North Chicago, to register for that and to get more information about other upcoming webinars that are coming up. And by the way, I would also say score.org has a wealth of information of articles and webinars and live programs that you can tap into for a variety of subjects. And if you wanted to request a mentor, this is the process that you would go through for that, and that will be available for you. John, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we did it, 7:16. We finished in time, so I would be happy to answer any questions that we might have. Hopefully I can, between maybe the two of us, John, we can do that. Are you
Hey,
there?
Chris, thanks a lot. Yes, thanks a lot for the presentation. This has been very, very helpful for people. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience here. One was, what are some creative ways to compensate a board of advisors without giving up equity?
I've generally found with a board of advisors and the groups that I've worked with is that these are people that just want you to be successful. They might be retired business folks. They might be family members. They're not necessarily looking at equity in the company, but they want you to be successful with it, and so they're willing to help you and work with you. And I'd say if that became a stumbling block, maybe that's not the person that you're necessarily going to bring in on the front end. Might be later on.
Another one here is, what's the difference between an accelerator and an incubator?
Incubator is usually at the very early stages of business operation. And that's when a company is just getting started, really probably doesn't have any customers yet, really working off of an idea. It's an opportunity for you to get in, and there are a series of different industry-related incubators in Chicagoland. I mean, we're very fortunate where we are. And so you can look it up. There's incubators that are focused in just the food industry and some of the other industries that are out there. So they can provide resources for you. Sometimes it's investors that might be part of that. An accelerator, usually the expectation is that your business is farther along. You're up and operating. Maybe you have some customers. Probably have some revenue coming in at that point. So their expectation is that typically you're up and operating at that point.
The next question here is, can the business model canvas be used to request funding from banks in lieu of a multi-page business plan?
Probably not from a bank. I would guess a bank might be more interested in a traditional business plan, which SCORE can help you with. But I would say what the business model canvas does is it gives you a bunch of information that can help you put together a traditional business plan. Traditional business plan is going to get down to a lot more detail on your forecast, projections, your finances, your costs. So it's designed more for that kind of bank funding, and they're going to be more comfortable with that. You might find that depending on the investor, if it was an angel investor, if it, they might be okay looking at a business model canvas, and especially if they got intrigued and excited about your idea. And especially if you had, what we call is that there's some sticky elements to it, which is you've got it patented, or you've got, copyrighted, trademark, something that gives you some control over it, then you might be able to move forward with business model canvas.
So another question here is where or who can we go to regarding costing and pricing for products?
As I mentioned earlier, usually, looking at what your competition is doing or people in a related area can be helpful when you're understanding your target audience. How are they paying? What are they paying to solve that problem today? They're solving it some way, right? So how are they solving it? Now, you may be coming up with something that's going to save them a bunch of money over the way they're doing it today, but they're paying for it some way, so you might want to understand what that is. So there's some research that you're going to want to do to try to find that out. But I've generally found in working with startups that they've been able to gather a lot of information from their competitors just to see what they're charging, what people are paying for it. If the competitor has gone public, there's more information that might be available to you, but you can get a lot right on the website. And by the way, let me just follow it up. When it comes to cost, sometimes as you're looking at potential suppliers, maybe even partners that you want to work with, they can be very valuable. In other instances, industry associations, especially if you're going to focus in a particular industry, most industries have industry associations. They've got them on a national level, they've got them on a regional level, and you might decide that you want to join one of those industry associations. It might be a local chamber of commerce that you're going to join. And sometimes you'll find that there's some resources as part of those organizations that can help you kind of think through those aspects as well.
Let's see. So the question here is, I have an IP submitted for my product, and it has never been done before. It is an AI solution. Who would my competitors be?
Well, that's a pretty broad field. And so it's a little difficult for me to say off the top of my head. We probably have to do a little research on that. But one of the things that you may want to also do, if you're not, when you're talking about artificial intelligence, I suspect you're fairly knowledgeable about that. There are some tools today that people are using that are providing them with a wealth of information in artificial intelligence, so ChatGPT and Bard. So if you're asking a question, I'm sure you're familiar with those, but that might be a place that you could investigate that and see if you could gather some more information. Or you may want to work with a SCORE mentor and see if there's somebody within SCORE that might have some information about that or be able to put you in touch with them.
So question here is, can the business model canvas assist me in creating a traditional business plan?
Yeah, that's true, John. I mean, we did talk about that. It does give you the foundation pieces for it. I mean, because you're going to put together, with your target market, you're going to put together the total available market, the served available market. You're going to put together your offering. You're going to put together your costs. You're going to put together your revenue projections. You're going to be putting together how you're going to reach the market through channels, how you're going to interact with the clients. So there's a whole variety of information that as you put together with the business model canvas, that you're going to be able to easily translate into a traditional business plan to save you a lot of time to get that up and operating. So I would say you really find that helpful. The other thing I would just reference as we're talking about this is you want to make sure that this is an iterative process, that you just don't treat it as an exercise that you do once. It should be something that you do a variety of times, right? You do it the first time, and that's version 1. And then you save version 1 and you make changes based on feedback that you're getting from the marketplace, and you make some changes, and that's version 2 as you go through. You're going to want to interview people. So when we work with the entrepreneur groups, we have scripts that they can use for problem interviews, for solution interviews, for follow-up with client type of interviews. So you're capturing that data as you go through. So keep in mind, you want to work this variety of times, and you'll see how it changes over time. And if you're working with things like angel investors, they probably want to know how many times, how many versions do you have? How many interviews have you had with potential customers? And as a result of the interviews, how many times have you had to change your original idea? Those are the kind of questions you might get as you sit through interview groups now.
The next question here is, what are some common mistakes to avoid when using the business model canvas?
Yeah, well, one I just referenced, and that is that you only use it once. You've got to continue to use it over a variety of times. Another is that you don't take into account external factors that can impact it. You only know so much on day 1, but then things start happening that can influence this document as you go through. The other thing that can be a problem is if you don't use it in collaborating or discussing with other people. It's a great tool for you to use. It gives people a real good understanding of where you're going with this. So if you're thinking about a partnership, or you're thinking about maybe a supplier, a dealer, it's a great tool that you can use. So you want to keep that in mind and figure out ways to use that, and not a lot of times with students, they'll use it as an exercise. Okay, I did the assignment, I'm done. Well, that's, as an entrepreneur, that can't be the way you look at it. That it won't be a successful tool for you if you treat it that way.
Here's a question that's a little bit vague. We may be able to get some more detail. What's the best and most efficient way to find suppliers for my product? I guess it would depend on the product, right?
It would depend on the product. And I would also point you again to these industry associations. And I would look that up and see if there are any that kind of match the industry that you're looking to focus on. You may be surprised how many they are. And you before you join an industry association, because usually there's some cost involved with that, you really want to do a little bit of research and find out how many members they have. And usually they'll share a fair amount of information, the membership group will you. But that's a great way to find out how you can tap into potential suppliers for you. Another way is, again, through working through chambers, working with SCORE. We can frequently help you through that process, kind of think through that with you.
Let's see, the last question that we have here, and this should be the last one, is how can I use the business model canvas to develop a business strategy?
Well, once you've been able to take your hypothesis and test those in the marketplace and get some feedback, that then gives you the ability to put your strategy together. And your strategy is really in a variety of ways. What's your strategy for how you're going to reach those customers? So you might put a strategy of your distribution channels, right? And figure out how you're going to do it. You might put a strategy around how you're going to build a relationship with those customers. So originally you thought you might do it a certain way, but by testing some of the information that you put into your business model canvas, you've decided to kind of develop a different strategy around that. We talked about getting suppliers or getting partners or getting groups that are going to help you out. What's your strategy around doing that? How are you going to go about doing that? So there's a lot that goes into that. What I would just end with at this point is to say, hey, there are a lot of people that want you to be successful and want to help you. Take advantage of that. I mean, there are free resources. SCORE is just one of them. There are others that are out there, and there's folks that want to help you and want to guide you along the way. We have some experience and been doing this for a number of years. And so take advantage of that, tap into that, and that will help you. It helps you get started and helps guides you through the process. And that doesn't mean there aren't going to be obstacles out there. There will be. I mean, there are. It's tough to start a new business, but if you persevere through that and you're tenacious, and a good entrepreneur is, you're going to be the one that's successful. You're going to be on the 50% that makes it, and we want to help you get there. Again, I want to thank you all very much for being with us this evening. I only wish we could do this in person, and I could meet you all and see you in person. But I've enjoyed being with you, and I hope you found some value in this in the program.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And as a reminder, this will be on our YouTube channel in a couple of days here, and we will be sending out a link to that YouTube channel. Actually, there was one in the chat, but also if you want to, I believe you can get a copy of the chat. So thanks a lot for everyone attending, and we will see you in one of our future webinars here. Thanks a lot.